headlines, President Park Geun-hye stresses the need to revamp the country's pension system for public workers amid political wrangling over reform terms. Korea slams Japan for its attempts to list its Meiji industrial facilities, a symbol of its forced labor of many Koreans during Japan's colonial rule, as a World Heritage Site. And a growing number of senior citizens in Korea are growing independent from their children, but not feeling so independent financially. Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. Thanks for tuning in. And live from Seoul, I am Kang Chery. Pension reforms for public servants are at the top of the Korean political agenda this week. President Park Geun-hye stressed the need for a reform during Tuesday's cabinet meeting, but political discord at the National Assembly continues. Our Park Geun-hye reports.
Korea's pension plan for public servants has been in deficit since the mid-1990s, with shortages filled by taxes. To address this pressing matter, President Park Geun-hye, speaking at Tuesday's cabinet meeting, called on the National Assembly to urgently address these public servant pension reforms for the future of the country.
국회가 시한 내에 이 연금 개혁을 마무리 짓지 못하면 내년부터는 매일 100억 원씩 연간 3조 7천억 원의 세금이 들어가야 하고
President Park stressed that these reforms should be carried out in a way that efficiently reduces the government budget, but also demonstrates fairness and sustainability to Koreans. Both political parties previously agreed to pass the reform plan at the full assembly on May 2nd. However, on Tuesday, they failed to form a working group for negotiations on the reforms.
The main opposition has been saying that they have strengths in economic affairs. But I'd like to ask them how they can say such things when they drag on and oppose the pension reforms.
It is unacceptable that the government tries to get through the reforms with the ruling party leading the process, with a limited deadline just like a military operation. The reforms should be proactively led by the government, like labor management negotiations.
Meanwhile, public sector unions said they will not participate at the negotiating table if the May 2nd deadline is upheld. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
South Korea has slammed Japan for its attempts to list its Meiji industrial facilities as a World Heritage Site. That's because the facilities were the sites where many Koreans were forced to work under Japan's colonial rule in the early 1900s. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Korea has reiterated its opposition to the possible listing of a group of Japanese industrial facilities on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Seoul's foreign ministry said Tuesday that the Meiji industrial sites, where tens of thousands of Koreans were forced to work under Japanese rule in the early 1900s, should not be recognized as intangible cultural assets.
To list these facilities, with their painful history of forced labor for Koreans under Japan's colonial rule, as a World Heritage Site does not correspond with the discipline and purpose of UNESCO.
However, there are reports that the International Council on Monuments and Sites, or ICOMOS, said Japan's industrial facilities are qualified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, upping Tokyo's chances. ICOMOS, a non-government advisory body for UNESCO, held 2 rounds of meetings last December and this month to review the applications for new World Heritage listings. For Japan, the 28 sites, mainly located in Kyushu, are proud relics from its Meiji Industrial Revolution. For Korea, they are painful reminders of Japan's colonial rule. The final verdict will be released at the 39th session of the World Heritage Committee in Germany this summer. 21 member countries, including Korea and Japan, will vote on the issue. The sites need at least 2/3 of the votes to be approved. And until then, the foreign ministry here in Seoul says it will continue its efforts to prevent the Japanese sites from receiving UNESCO recognition. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Korea's industrial output rose at the fastest pace in nearly 4 years last month, but the rise came largely from temporary factors, so questions still linger over the pace of recovery. Our Hwang Ji has the details.
February was bullish, with production across all industries in Korea going up by 2.5% from the previous month. That marks a rebound from a 2% drop in January and the biggest monthly hike since March 2011. But when taking a look at the underlying trend of figures, it's not all rosy.
The pickup came from a low base effect in January and a rise in demand thanks to the Lunar New Year holiday that fell in February this year. It's better to average the output growth for the first 2 months, as the holiday sometimes falls in January.
The Finance Ministry also says that the output figure for all of January and February rose a mere 0.1% compared to the fourth quarter last year, pointing to a still fragile recovery momentum. Given that attention is now focused on the March figures, will they back up a solid growth trend or remain sluggish, making it more difficult for economic policymakers to prop up the ailing economy?
Whether the figures for exports, investment, and consumption improve in March will help determine the pace of recovery.
The Finance Ministry, however, expects the trend of low oil prices and the low key rate to benefit the economy, gradually strengthening Korea's recovery momentum. By sector, output in mining and manufacturing went up 2.6% in February from the previous month, thanks to strong demand for automobiles and semiconductors. Service sector output rose 1.6%, while retail sales spiked nearly 3%. Kang Chery, ARIRANG News.
April is expected to be a crucial time for the Korean economy. As we talked about earlier in the program today, major reforms to the civil pension system and the minimum wage have been on the negotiating table for months, with time running out to gain momentum for a full-fledged economic recovery. Our Son Jung-in tells us more.
The government is aiming to pull the nation out of the sluggish economy through structural reform in 4 major areas: the public sector, labor, finance, and education, while boosting domestic consumption to revive the economy. However, in April, policymakers will have to come to agreement on the process of reforming the civil servant pension system and on ways to revamp the overall labor market structure. A full-fledged negotiation on minimum wage is also set for next month, amid pressure from the government to raise the salary to increase overall household income. Deputy Prime Minister Park Geun-hye has repeatedly stressed that April is a critical time for accomplishing the reforms. He promised tangible results by the end of the month. It won't be easy. Structural reform itself is a complicated task. It gets even more challenging when the administration, lawmakers, and unions can't find common ground. Questions also remain about whether the National Assembly will be able to pass 9 pending bills on economic revitalization during a month-long provisional session set to begin April 7th. With economic uncertainty still lingering, insiders say the Korean economic landscape will be shaped by the outcome of these structural reform efforts over the next month. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
Many Korean senior citizens 65 or older say they're not living with their kids. They're also feeling insecure about their finances. Questions are being raised on whether enough government measures are in place to take care of the rapidly aging population. But experts point to a deeply rooted custom in the country. Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Nearly 15% of the Korean population is in the 65 or older age bracket, a sign that the country is on its path to a senior society. But many of the seniors feel more and more insecure. Korea's Welfare Ministry said Tuesday that 7 out of 10 Korean seniors are either living by themselves or just with the spouse without the support of their children. The report is based on a 2014 survey conducted by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs. They spoke to nearly 10,500 seniors. 3 of 10 elderly people are working after retirement, most of them to support daily living costs, causing advocates to wonder if there's enough government support for rapidly growing age population. But experts say the problem stems from traditional Korean customs.
Unlike many Western countries, most Korean parents support their children through college and even till they get married. So while the parents, or the elderly in this case, are economically active, they aren't saving as much for their age years, eventually forced to make more even when they're old.
Chung went on to say that government initiatives like broadening the reach of pension programs should be in place to better help the elderly. She added that younger generations should also start saving earlier, giving their parents more opportunity to save up for their senior years. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Trend of encouraging smokers to kick the habit. Previously, people were allowed to light up in small-sized shops, but starting this Wednesday, smoking will be banned in all restaurants, coffee places, and shops. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the story.
Smoking will be prohibited in all restaurants, coffee shops, internet rooms, and cafes in Korea starting next month. Those caught violating the rule will be subject to a penalty. The smoker will be charged up to $90, and the proprietor could be fined $1,500. Local authorities say they strengthened the restriction after giving businesses a 3-month grace period this year. Small-sized shops less than 100 square meters in width were initially exempt from the restriction, but are now subject to the rule. Shops are banned from running smoking areas, but smoking booths are still permitted, though customers inside them can't be served food or drinks. And this governmental health initiative seems to be working. The Ministry of Health and Welfare says the number of people enrolled in non-smoking clinics shot up this year. Nearly 262,000 applicants signed up between January and March 20th, 3 times more than the same period last year. But the ministry says it will be 6 months before it can determine if the number of smokers has truly declined. That's when a clinic participant can be classified as a non-smoker. Last year, around 44% of those who enrolled in clinics indicated that they stopped smoking for more than 6 months. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And before we continue, we do apologize for an audio issue earlier in the program. And moving on, high-profile Korean tech companies Samsung and LG Group have called a truce and agreed to stop all legal disputes among their group affiliates. The decision resolves 5 conflicts, including a battle over an alleged act of vandalism by LG employees. Samsung accused LG of deliberately wrecking its washing machine at the Germany-based IFA electronics show last September. In its response, LG filed a charge against Samsung for technology theft of its OLED technologies. Specific details on how the agreement was reached were not disclosed, but the two conglomerates said they will avoid lawsuits and settle differences through dialogue down the road. Washington's Defense Chief Ashton Carter is due in South Korea next week for talks with his top South Korean officials. The agenda is said to be focused on the threat posed by North Korea, but there's still speculation that Carter will want to talk about deploying a controversial U.S. missile defense system to South Korea. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter is scheduled to visit Seoul for the first time next week for talks with his South Korean counterpart, Han Min-gu. A South Korean government source says Carter will arrive for a 2-day visit starting April 9th. During his talks with Han and President Park Geun-hye, Carter is expected to discuss ways to better deal with North Korean issues and to boost the two countries' military alliance. But the main focus is on whether the deployment to South Korea of a U.S. missile defense system called THAAD will be on the agenda.
Since THAAD is a hot issue, it looks unlikely it will be formally mentioned, but there's a high possibility it could be discussed informally on the side.
It's an issue that has stirred controversy both at home and abroad, with China and Russia both expressing their strongly opposition to it. Carter is known to be a strong advocate of the THAAD system. During his confirmation hearing in February, he emphasized the need to beef up missile defense, calling North Korea's ballistic missile capabilities a direct threat to the United States and South Korea. Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, who was in Seoul last week, said he had productive discussions with his South Korean counterpart, Choi Yoon-hee, about building an integrated air and missile defense system in South Korea. Officials in Seoul say that did not come up during their discussion. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye has tried to dismiss concerns that South Korea is stuck between the world's two superpowers in terms of its foreign policy. During a luncheon with her officials Tuesday, she was quoted as saying that one does not need to worry about Seoul being caught in the middle of China and the United States when referring to South Korea's decision to join China-led regional bank and a pending decision to bring in a U.S. missile defense system. She reportedly added that South Korea makes such decisions based on a pool of enough information and with dignity. Robots helping household chores are no longer a new concept, but researchers in the United States have been busy expanding this idea, so people may soon have a slew of new co-workers who won't have any of the human flaws. Our Lee Ji-young tells us more.
It's not the nurse, but a robot that's handing a surgical scalpel to the doctor. It then passes scissors to the doctor when requested. Until recently, assembly line robots were not able to work alongside people, being that they were often too big, moved too swiftly, and were dangerous for humans to be around. But these so-called collaborative robots are smaller than their predecessors and move in a more controlled and meticulous manner. Experts say they could be utilized in various fields like the medical industry and housekeeping, further expanding the realm of robotics from auto and semiconductors.
Our research is motivated in part by the increasing number of Americans who are elderly or disabled and need assistance in their homes.
With the global market already warming up to the idea of private drones, companies producing these robots are jumping in on the action. And the growing competition and demand is raising expectations of enhanced productivity in the workplace, as the problem-solving skills of humans combine with the strength and endurance of robots. Lee Ji-young, ARIRANG News.
The investigation continues into the Germanwings flight that crashed into the French Alps last week. The co-pilot at the center of this disaster now suspected of being suicidal. To tell us more, Paul Lee is joining us from the news center. So, Paul, authorities are trying to determine a motive now behind the actions of this pilot. What have they found so far?
Well, the 27-year-old co-pilot Andreas Lupitz is believed to have deliberately crashed the airliner. He was treated for suicidal tendencies in the past, according to German prosecutors. Now, it's the best lead they have yet, considering a lack of evidence pointing to terrorism or links to extremist groups. In the meantime, the parent company of the airline, Lufthansa, says it will set aside a $300 million fund to deal with this crash, which killed all 150 people on board. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
The German prosecutor confirmed that co-pilot Andreas Lubitz received mental health treatment in the past.
Several years ago, the co-pilot underwent psychotherapy for suicidal tendencies over a long period before receiving his pilot's license. After that, further doctor's visits led to sick notes without suicidal tendencies or aggression mentioned in them.
They haven't found a suicide note, but investigators did discover doctor's notes in Lubitz's home, including one for the day of the crash, which excused him from work. Lufthansa, the parent company of Germanwings, said it wasn't aware of these notes because they're confidential, limited to the doctor and the patient. However, authorities added that they had not found any indication from interviews with witnesses that Lubitz was planning to crash the plane. While the investigation continues, these revelations are raising questions about how much personal health information pilots should disclose to their employers. Meanwhile, DNA strands from 80 of the victims have been found so far. But the head of the forensic team in France says it could take months to identify the victims and that they may not be able to identify everyone.
Fingerprint comparisons made from administrative documents take time because the conditions are bad. The samples and pieces of bodies are not in a condition that will allow the immediate and easy interpretation.
An official memorial service is set for April 17th in Germany's Cologne Cathedral. Germany's president and chancellor will attend the service. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
With just hours left before Tuesday's deadline, top delegations are holding last-minute talks in Switzerland on Iran's nuclear program. So, Paul, this critical meeting may decide the fate of Tehran's future with the international community. Any indications of a breakthrough?
Well, despite a lot of talk of optimism, there's been no signs of any significant progress. The 7 foreign ministers have been locked in marathon negotiations, which took them through the night. Iran, the UN Security Council countries, and Germany now have less than 12 hours to arrive at a political framework. This would suspend some of Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for the partial lifting of economic sanctions. Speaking from Lausanne, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said challenges still remained.
Those marathon-like negotiations have reached the final stage. 7 foreign ministers have gathered here to sum up all the achievements we've made so far, as well as key problems demanding to be settled. We are working towards methods and ways to solving those problems.
Even if a deal is reached by the Tuesday deadline, officials say it could still fall apart when the two sides attempt to agree on technical details for the comprehensive accord later in June.
And switching gears to the latest industry news, a famed billionaire Elon Musk is creating a frenzy on Wall Street, and this time with one single tweet. So, Paul, this captain of industry has his hands on many ventures, from space rockets to electric cars. What's this latest one about?
Well, that's the thing. It's a mystery of sorts at this point, but it hasn't stopped investors from speculating that Elon Musk must be teasing the next big thing, as they say. The 43-year-old's Twitter feed went viral on Monday. He said he was very optimistic about Tesla's long-term future in China, despite what he called earlier mistakes. Musk founded the electric car company in 2003 and currently serves as CEO. He also tweeted about the plans to unveil a major new product line from Tesla on April 30th, but said it would not be a vehicle. That statement pushed the company's shares up 3% after trading near its 52-week low earlier in the day.
And ending on a lighter note, a wave of the world's biggest stars have come together in launching their own music streaming service. It's called Tidal. I hope I said it correctly. What's behind this big push into the tech industry?
Well, analysts say it was inevitable. It's no secret that musicians are not happy with the current revenue split from other rival services like Spotify or Pandora, just to name a few. So it appears they're now trying to cut out the middleman. Some of the music industry's biggest names were at the launch event in New York on Monday to declare their share of the company. They included Beyonce, Madonna, Kanye West, and Daft Punk, among others. Alicia Keys, who also announced co-ownership, said it's the start of a whole new era.
Jimi Hendrix once said that music doesn't lie. If there is something to be changed in the world, then it can only happen through music. An overstatement? Maybe. But maybe not. After all, there is truth in the old adage that music makes the world go round. Think about how many times music has truly changed the world and reshaped our culture.
Online users can get access to Tidal by subscribing to a monthly fee. The music and video streaming platform was recently bought by Jay-Z for $54 million. Despite stiff competition, experts say Jay-Z's deep ties to major record labels and other popular artists may just prove to be a winning formula. Charity?
Gotta be very interesting, Paul. Thank you so much for those stories, and we will see you again in just about 2 hours.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather forecast. Light drizzles are falling here in Seoul, but it's not quite enough to make up for the recent dry conditions. And it looks like the rainfall will spread to other parts of the country. Jeju could get up to 10 millimeters, while other regions are looking at about less than 5. Conditions will gradually clear up by tomorrow morning, and Wednesday shaping up to be another warm day with daytime highs peaking from between 9 to 21 degrees. But please be aware of the big gap in numbers from day to night. Now looking ahead, another round of precipitation is in store for Thursday and Friday, dropping much more rain than what we got to see today. On to tomorrow's readings. Seoul reaches up to 19, Gwangju jumps to 21, Busan hits 16. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju hit 19, Dokdo 10, Mount Kumgang reaches 6. Those are the updates I have for you now. I'll be back with more in just about 2 hours.
Thank you very much, Park Geun-hye, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching, and join us again at 10 p.m. Korea time.